Hey, welcome to day 25. If you've ever been to a cross country race or a long distance race of any kind, and considering where we live, I would say that many of us probably have, you've likely witnessed something that I find to be absolutely phenomenal. So you watch these runners go for sometimes miles, and you're sitting there wondering how they're doing what they're doing already, but they're keeping this steady pace for this long distance of time, and the better they are, the steadier their pace is, the less that they're allowing those around them to kind of dictate how fast they're going to run. They know what they're going to do, they have their plan, and they're going to stick to it. But then after they've run for this long distance and you're sitting there and you're thinking there's no way that they have anything left to give here, they've got to be toast. They get near the end of this race, it would appear as if like all plan gets thrown out the window. They give it everything they got and they just completely let loose. This is something that we call a kick. After miles and miles of running, these runners find another gear and they give it every last bit of energy that they have to the finish. Strategy? Absolutely. But from the outside, it looks like just an all out runner's version of a brawl until they get to the end of it. This triumphal entry of Jesus is kind of like the beginning of the kick in a race. It's like the beginning of the kick to his ministry, or what we call his ministry years. For 3 years, Jesus had been walking around Judea, teaching, performing miracles, and gathering followers. He's been methodic and he's been patient. He's poked the bear for sure, but never too much. And for 3 years, his adversaries, his opponents, the religious leaders, they have been secretly plotting ways to get rid of him. They began, when he kind of came on the scene and was getting attention, by just trying to label him more as a heretic so that people wouldn't listen to him. But as he's grown in popularity, they've worked harder and harder in the shadows, in the secret, in a strategic, patient way, of figuring out how they could just eliminate him from the earth. But after healing Lazarus, something that we read about that really awoke the masses of people to Jesus and to who he was, Jesus does something even more audacious. It's a moment that is so big that all 4 gospel accounts write about it. He rides into Jerusalem on a baby donkey. Now I know that doesn't sound like such a big deal when you read about it. In fact, we often refer to that as a pretty humble moment, a pretty humiliating moment. And it was humble. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Jesus wasn't humble. But consider this moment in the light of the people that would have witnessed it. 500-ish years earlier, a man named Zechariah had actually prophesied about this moment. He said these words: "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Jesus knew what he was doing in this moment. Was he humble? Of course he was. But was he silently proclaiming that he was the king? Yes. And that was not welcome news for the religious leaders who wanted to keep their power, who wanted to protect tradition, who lived in fear. But at the same time, it was great news for these leaders. See, because Rome didn't care about a religion. You could believe whatever you wanted. As long as you also worshiped Caesar, you could worship whatever gods you wanted. But what they did care about was somebody who proclaimed themselves to be the king. This entry set in motion a flurry of activity that we now know as Holy Week. It set in motion the kick to the finish. No longer could the crowd be kept at bay. They had seen the back from the dead Lazarus. No longer could Jesus work in the quiet places. No longer would the voices be kept silent. They were watching the king enter the city. The opposition had one chance to win this race. They had one chance to outkick Jesus, and that was to cheat. Can you get a sense of this bold move that Jesus was making? Can you feel the intensity of the moment? Do you hear the cry of the crowd as the sprint to the finish begins? As we prepare for Easter, feast upon his humble boldness in this moment. Feast upon what his humble boldness in that moment meant for us today, still 2,000 years later. For tomorrow, I invite you to read what went through the mind of Jesus while he was riding on that donkey into the city. Turn to Luke chapter 19 and read verses 41 through 44. Again, that's Luke 19, verses 41 through 44. And be comforted as you read this, that even in his most glorious of moments, God always has his heart set on us. I'll see you tomorrow.